Good evening, students. Welcome to the second lecture of this course. Today's lecture, as you would see in the book, we are going to be talking about laissez faire. How do you spell it? Laissez dash FAIRE. Laissez faire economics. Remember, in our introduction, we talked about orthodox economic liberalism. Right. Orthodox economic liberalism means very limited government role, limiting the government role in the markets. So market does the job. The opposite is heterodox economic liberalism, right? Where there's a strong government intervention. Today's focus is laissez-faire. That means what? That means hands off. Hands off. They're telling market as government to hands off, leave the market alone. It will do its function of what? Allocating the resources efficiently. Okay. And what is liberalism means? Liberty under law. Liberty under law. And so liberty means what? Freedom, right? And it's usually interchangeable. Liberty under law and laissez-faire economics. Today we're going to see different scholars whose ideas had an impact on this laissez-faire school of thought. It's an economic school of thought which talks about markets being the dominant role they play in society. Last class we talked about politics, economics, and society. Three, A intersection B intersection C, where this whole thing happens, right? So now we are going to talk about some of the scholars. I'll tell you some of the names. Adam Smith, Scottish philosopher, right? He is considered like the first economist. He wrote this book called Wealth of Nations. We'll talk about that. And David Ricardo, in the beginning of the 19th century, he became prominent. And then we'll be talking about John Stuart Mill, a very famous philosopher, and his ideas on the laissez-faire economics. And then we'll be talking about Keynes, who is like in the 20th century become very famous, especially when FDR got elected. Big depression was in this country. Okay. And then Frederick Hayek, who wrote a book called The Road to Serfdom. And all this, guys, why do we need to study this? They are all dead and gone. Why are we studying this? Well, their ideas are still relevant and has an economic impact. This is not just history. It is how currently their ideas have an impact in the international political economic arena, and how governments and markets play a role in societies around the world of different states. And that's what we're trying to understand this, right? And so let's start with our very popular guy now among the laissez-faire economics people who are supporters of a laissez-faire economics. I often like to quote him, and his name is Adam Smith, the Scottish philosopher. He wrote his book Wealth of Nations in 1776. Okay, this is when England was coming out of feudalism to become a capitalistic economy, right? And a capitalistic economy in the 17th century it did. And he wrote this book, published it in the 18th century, 1776, which Alexander Hamilton read while fighting the British in actually New York City, Kips Bay. They fought and they were hiding in Harlem Heights, and he was with a candlelight reading it. How are these British redcoats so powerful? A small country able to project military might. So he wanted to understand. And so he was reading this Adam Smith's book. So what is Adam Smith saying? What is his ideas? One simple idea very prominent people talk about often is like each person is doing their job in market because of their self-motivation, motivation to make money. So he talks about a butcher is not cutting the meat so that your family will have meat. It's not out of benevolence, he says, but to make profit, to provide for his family and for him money. So, a winemaker or a bread maker, all these guys, he says, are working in the name of self motivation, because for them, they need money and resources. And because of it, guess what? Others benefit. You and I don't know to make everything, right? The sweater I'm wearing, I don't know to make it. We get it. And glasses, do I know? No. The watch, no. So we get it. I know to teach. So we all do something contributing in the market. We do, each has a work to do. And what? So that we could get things we want with the exchange of money. And that is Adam Smith's idea of efficiently, market has efficiency. And he was against mercantilism, which we'll talk about in next class, next video, mercantilism. But I gave you the introduction. What mercantilism is. It's like the states have power and they are working along with the market to make money. Their goal is to enrich the state and increase the power of the state in mercantilism. Whereas markets are working for individuals who are involved in it and who could contribute. The biggest contribution to the market gets the benefit. For example, Amazon, Jeff Bezos is very rich because he contributes to the website a lot of services. People could buy anything. It's an anything selling store. Elon Musk contributes through cars and rockets and all this way. So whatever market values, those people who do that benefit. You might have a great talent. The ballet dancers are amazing athletes, but they don't get paid same as like ball players, because ball players are valued in the market. There are more people go to see ball players than people go to see ballet dancers. Are you following? So what market values it will deliver to those people the riches. And in Adam Smith's idea that one should have specialization, so you should concentrate on the specialized area. So a pin maker, he talks about in his book Wealth of Nation, if you are, everyone is making a pin, like the bending of it, that the head part of the pin, and it takes less number of pins to be made by 10 people. But if the 10 people focus on each individual parts of making the pin, like someone is specialized in just bending of that pin and someone is making the head alone, and like that it goes, you make more pins. Just 10 people will end up making more pin. Even in, say, I'll give you an example of suit, another example. He didn't talk about it, but suit making, there's a trouser maker and there's a coat maker. Coat is like this jacket in America. In England, they call it coat. Coat maker. They make individually. They're trained and focus on that. One person doesn't make the entire suit. And so, and a cutter, and he draws and cuts the cloth. So when it is completely narrowed down, okay, someone is doing a particular job, specialized, then your production increases. Adam Smith did not want government to intervene in markets. He was against the mercantilistic ideas of the time in England, because mercantilists, uh, they were interested in government intervening and making money for the state and power. Now, let's talk about Adam Smith's other book, because people often quote Wealth of Nations. Hey, see, Adam Smith did not want markets to be left out. Laissez faire. Leave it, let it function alone, right? But he wrote another book which is less known, theory of moral sentiments. In theory of moral sentiments, he wrote that government has a role to play. Important, he didn't say government should intervene in the market, but government should be vigilant. Vigilant of what? Vigilant because vigilance is essential so that the markets doesn't go awry. like 2008 financial crisis, the market real estate bubble burst, and how many people were affected by that. Government needs to step in, right? So government shouldn't intervene always in the market, but should be careful to step in case markets are not doing its job. Market failures happen. And so and he wants government to always do some roles, like what? Courts, national security, laying roads. Why do you need courts? Well, if there are two people in a market have problem, you try to buy something, they took the money and they're not giving you the products, where do you go? You go to court. Court is government, right? And diseases, like we have a pandemic, and markets does not intervene. Governments have to step in, create a vaccine along with the help of the market, right? And we saw how the vaccines were created with help of Moderna, Pfizer, and these are private companies, but the government worked and gave free vaccines to its citizens, especially in the Western countries, and in third world countries like India and other places. Government gave free vaccines. So government steps in. If it's market, only the rich could afford, and what happens to the others, right? For the benefit of public good, government has to step in. What is public good? You might ask. Public goods are things which market cannot do. Like, for example, you walking in the Central Park. A rich person could walk, a poor person could walk. Nobody can say no to them, right? Public goods are goods which are allowed to be enjoyed by everyone. So it's non-rivalrous. Non-rivalrous. That means if I wear my sweater, another person cannot wear it. That's a private property, my sweater. So it's non-rivalrous. Rivalry means competition. There's no competition. That's it privately owned and non-excludable. That means if I have a private park, I could exclude who I want, and others who I allow could come in. In public parks, anyone can come in. That's the public good. It's non-rivalrous and non-excludable are public goods. So public good benefits, governments have to step in. The Theory of Moral Sentiments is a less known book. People don't usually talk about it, but it is known to show the other side of Adam Smith. And if you're interested, check out those books and ideas. So let's talk about Britain's corn laws. Corn. When they're talking about corn, they're talking about grains. Grains. Any grain. It's not just corn. Grains are what? Like rice, wheat, anything. So what are these laws? Corn laws. Well, when the society of Britain in the parliament, it was just the elite gentry, landowning gentry was dominating the parliament. Only they were elected and sitting there mostly. They wanted to protect their grains. From who? Protect their grains from competition from outside the country. So if from outside the country, if grains come in and makes the price of the grains in England cheaper, then these guys in England who are producing the grains cannot make profit because they want to sell it in good price. So they don't want competition. So they are sitting there saying, we need to protect our grain manufacturers, farmers, that is the landed gentry. And because we don't want grains from other places coming in and to be dependent on those grains. Why not? Why not be dependent on grains from other places, you might ask? Well, they were saying for national security reasons. Well, this is 1815, Napoleon Bonaparte was defeated. Before that, Napoleon Bonaparte was the biggest threat to England and Europe. He was occupying a lot of places in Europe, Napoleon of France. And they were saying, even though he wasn't planning, what if Napoleon Bonaparte blockaded, blockaded, blockaded using ships, the England is an island. And so grains from outside cannot come in. Our people will starve. So these were the fears. So we should be self-sustainable. That means we should be dependent on our own grains and not on other people's grains. So we don't want grains from other places coming in for competition. But that is for the benefit of those producing those grains and keeping high price. What is the problem with the monopoly? Monopoly is what? Monopoly is like an individual company owning, and they don't have competition. They make sure there's no competition. In that case, what happens? If I am the only person making these markers, whatever markers I set, that's the price. There's no competition. You can't go anywhere. If you want marker, you got to buy in my price. Competition is good for the buyers because it reduces the price, one, okay, and also they compete, the market makers compete to create better quality products, so that increases innovation. So I might make a marker lighter and last longer, then people will buy that, right? Innovation happens, so the quality improves, so customers will get better quality for lesser price, right? And also in a democracy, free market, uh, um, in a free market, sorry, democratic society, you do not want any single organizations to have enormous power. So in our country, we have policies, United States, it's called trust busting. Trust busting. This means going after companies which are monopolies and dominate the market. Government steps in and go after them and bust them, like we have done after AT&T, right? And after Rockefeller's oil firm, Standard Oil. So companies, one big giant will be broken into pieces. So they could be separate companies, say they could own not as a one single company and dominate the market. Are you following? The government does that. Anti-Sherman Trust Law. It's named after Sherman, who was not the general Sherman of the Civil War. His brother, who was in the Congress at the time, it was named after him in 19th century in America. So trust busting. So monopoly is not good for the country or the people. Now, markets don't care about monopoly. In fact, people will get greedy and become monopolized. That is the drawback of a laissez-faire economics. We do have monopolies now. We have Microsoft, Apple, Google. I mean, think of another search engine. You can't think of it. Not even remotely close. There's other Bing and other things. Is it do you ever use it? Google dominates. Facebook now taking over other small companies, buying Instagram and others. So this is how companies dominate. Apple, the big five, they call them. Amazon, all these are in their areas. They are monopolies in whatever they deliver, right? Okay, before you understand. So this Britain's corn laws, these guys were doing protectionism, that is protecting their interest of selling their corns in the prices, the monopoly. Guess what happened? Because Adam Smith is about free market. Free market means you shouldn't protect, you should let the competition do the job. And it changed. The protectionism is government protecting these companies of grain producers. And that was changed after the parliament got more representation from people in the cities, okay? Not just the landed gentry, middle class people who came into office. Then they voted against these corn laws and they were repealed, these corn laws, okay? So that's the story of protectionism is actually bad for the country. But they will argue in terms of national security in this case and other forms of arguments. Okay. Now, let's talk about another British philosopher who you should know when you talk about laissez-faire. Okay, leave it alone, right? Laissez-faire, French. His name is David Ricardo. David Ricardo's famous word still used is called comparative advantage. COMPARATIVE. Comparative advantage. Even if you read newspapers, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, anything, big national papers, they use this often. So what are they talking about? Comparative advantage. So David Ricardo was actually talking about nothing but you and I. Let's compare two countries. You should produce what you're good at, and I should produce what I'm good at, and we should exchange what we are. So if you are good at producing marker, and then you stick to producing marker. And if you're not good at producing glasses, you should not produce glasses. Why do you waste your time? It's not efficient. I am good at producing glasses. I'm not good at producing markers. So we should trade. I should buy markers from you, and you should buy glasses from me, from my country. So in that way, we will be focusing what we are good at. Okay? And in that way, we are concentrating what we are good at. Okay? Division of labor. Adam Smith wrote this called division of labor, focusing. Remember the pin heads that bend, each guy should do one thing, right? The suit maker, the one makes the coat, one other makes pant. So they do what they're good at and get better at it. So in that way, production will increase. So this comparative advantage argument by David Ricardo is using that, what countries are good at, they should stick to that and then trade. And that way you benefit and I benefit. That's his argument, comparative advantage. David Ricardo's is still used, but if countries, counter argument to that is my argument. If countries stick to what they're good at and not try to do better at things which they're not good at, then countries would be same doing, like Japan will be still producing textiles, which they were good at in the early 20th century. They wouldn't be producing cars. Honda, okay, Toyota, all are Japanese cars, and they're good. They're better than American cars in terms of quality. How so? Like they run for 500,000 miles, some of them, and keep running. American cars 200,000 miles. Resale values, that's why good for Japanese cars than American. They weren't like that. They learned it from the American companies and kept improving Kaizen, continuous quality improvement. They improved and produced better cars, and they do now around the world, cheaper and better. So now the point is that you don't need to just stick to what you are. That means South Korea wouldn't be producing TVs, and companies like Samsung is competing with Apple, right? South Korea is a tiny country, right? So it's like smaller than a lot of our big states. So it's a tiny country, but it's doing very well in focusing. Right after Korean War, 1951, they were poor. They were poorer than North Korea. Can you believe it? North Korea is a poor country, and now they're not. The economic productivity of climbing up in different areas which they are not specialized, they become specialized. So there goes comparative advantage argument. Let's talk about John Stuart Mill, third person. John Stuart Mill. J.S. Mill, you would have heard. M-I-L-L. You know how to spell John. Stuart, S-T-U-A-R-T. What's this dude's idea? I'll tell you a little story about him because I read his autobiography. Stories helps you remember things better. Otherwise, it's just ideas. All these are ideas, by the way. Everything we are discussing, laissez faire, free market ideology, right? Less government intervention. All these are freaking ideas that you cannot touch. If I write it in a paper, it's just the paper you could touch. But these ideas have a huge impact around the world and in societies where we live. And that is why we are studying this. Otherwise, why would we study about these dead guys? John Stuart Mill was reading Greek history at the age of 3. His father wants him to be a big scholar. And 4, 5, he was thinking deep like a scholar. In his teenage years, he wrote books which are still in print. Utilitarianism, the philosophy of utilitarianism is Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, right? And it is a widely used philosophy in government circles. And John Stuart Mill is the one who talked about free markets, liberty. He wrote a book on liberty. And so when is the government justified in using a visible hand? Visible hand means, Adam Smith said, visible hand means the government. Invisible hand means the markets. So let the invisible hand do its role. Visible hand should not step in, right? So when he asked the questions like John Stuart Mill asked the questions like, when is the government justified in using its visible hand to assist or replace the invisible hand of the market? When is it justifiable? How far can the state go before its interference with individual rights and liberties becomes abusive? So he is talking that when governments step in and do too much role, it could affect individual liberties. What does he mean by individual liberties? You know what individual liberties are? It's like your right to freedom of speech, right? Right to exercise your religion. And you're like, wait a minute, yeah, they're protected in the United States. Where do you hear that? That's right, Constitution. It's in the Constitution. Where in Constitution? In the Bill of Rights. Bill of Rights are put in there so that the government doesn't violate those rights of individual citizens. So the idea that government could step in and do more to intervene in the markets could actually ended up violating individual rights. If the government says these are the products you should make, if I am a hat maker and they say you should make only red hat and black hat, you can't make green hat. But I see there are my customers want green hat. I want to make green hats. And they're like, no, we want red hat and black hat. That's it. And they're affecting my profit. They are affecting my individual liberty to choose. Right? It's not violating anyone. In fact, it's helping people who want green hat. This is just a wild example. I don't know who wants green hat, but hang on with me. In Soviet Union, they had command and control, state control economies. There's no private property. If you go to buy bags, it'll be brown bag and black bag. If you want a yellow bag like Coach, you're not going to get it because there's no company producing it. It's what the state allocates. Whatever they allocate, those are the ones it's made. Isn't that interesting? So John Stuart Mill asked questions like that. How far can the state go until it violates our individual liberty? Well, important question, and could become abusive. Now, let's talk about John Maynard Keynes. This is another dude we're going to talk about, like fourth philosopher, I think. And John Maynard Keynes, how do you spell the middle name? Maynard. Maynard. Keynes is like Keynes. Keynesian idea. He drifted from these guys' ideas of government should not play a role in the markets because there was a big depression. Big depression happened, you know, right? 1930s it started and went on until almost the end of the World War II. And during that time, who got elected? FDR. Many of FDR's economic policies, when he got elected, was strong government role. Government was producing jobs for the people, right? Giving work opportunities because market failed. 25% unemployment. And there were people standing in lines in soup kitchens. If you've seen photos of it, in suits and ties, and they're standing in line for soup. And when market fails, it's unbelievable pain and suffering could happen. So this John Maynard Keynes' ideas of government stepping in, and FDR stepped in to lift an ailing nation. FDR's biographer said, you know, he was handicapped, right? Disabled because of polio. See, he used a beautiful line, I remember. He lifted himself from the wheelchair to lift a nation from its knees. It's a beautiful, poetic way of saying how he helped the country at the time to wither through the hardship of economic turmoil happening at the time. Similarly, in 2008 financial crisis, when the bubble bursted, when Obama came into office, it was like the Big Depression. It was the second biggest catastrophe since Big Depression. And government played a strong role in stepping in. and have to help the people, right? In the So now even this COVID crisis happened. What happened? Then government gives money to people. There was huge benefits for people, not only unemployment benefits, but if you were COVID stricken, they gave extra money. And for all those who suffered from economic problems. And so government has a role to play. And John Maynard Keynes' ideas helped create a welfare society, quote unquote, welfare society in America, which increased the equality. America at the time, before Big Depression, was an unequal society. Have you heard of the words robber barons? Robber barons. These are like John D. Rockefeller, Carnegie, the Carnegie Hall. All these guys were billionaires, right? Modern day multi-billionaires. But people were mostly in the poverty area and the bottom. It's like now the country is getting there, like inequality is getting there, like the robber barons times. How so? Well, the top 3 guys in America have more money than the bottom 50% of Americans. It's like about 160 million Americans do not have as much money as the top 3. That is a highly unequal society. That is what happens. That's the drawback of laissez-faire economics. So market didn't efficiently deliver in this case, did it? No. So market does not look at morality, doesn't care about inequality. It cares about, like, whoever is valued as a big ball player, he will get the biggest check. And that's how it delivers. And it doesn't care if there are poverty or inequality. And unless government steps in to alleviate that problem, if not completely remove that problem. Sorry, my clock, birds make this noise, and it'll stop soon. Then I will continue. Okay. Let's talk about embedded liberalism. So at the time, the policies of John Maynard Keynes created many institutions. Like what? Institutions like World Bank. Have you heard of World Bank? It's in DC. You go to DC, you could see IMF, World Bank. IMF is also created at the time, right after World War II. International Monetary Fund, it's called. And then GATT, General Agreement on Trades and Tariffs, GATT, GATT abbreviation. GATT later become WTO, World Trade Organization. All these are institutions, government bureaucrats operating to alleviate poverty. World Bank is to alleviate poverty. IMF is to give loans to countries, third world countries now they give, but at the time to European countries and others which were suffering after the World War II. Why? Well, there is a benefit also to the loan giver. That is, well, one is like, remember the Marshall Plan? If you give money to these people, then they will be vested in capitalism and continue. Otherwise, these countries which are suffering could go to the communist column. During Cold War, communist and capitalism are fighting, right? Proxy wars, not directly engaging in wars, because they both had, at least by 1950, Soviet Union had nuclear weapons. So we will be exchanging nuclear weapons if we directly fight. That is why we need to make sure that the countries which were failing in the Western Europe come to the capitalistic democratic column. So we gave them loans. John Maynard Keynes' idea is not taken, then government has not to step in. If these countries fail economically, well, that's their problem. Well, that is what the market's done. Well, you can't leave it like that, right? And so we stepped in and helped with this creating institutions. Embedded liberalism, it's called. It's not like they're not having free market examples, but government is stepping in to make sure the free market works. Embed, something you embed in, so in a sweater, if something sticks. Embedded liberalism. And these organizations are still in function. While it has its flaws, we'll talk about that when we talk about globalization. What are the flaws of WTO, IMF, and World Bank? But these were created with these ideas of to create the Western Europe into after World War II to bring it to an international economic order. How many of you heard of hegemonic stability theory? Hegemonic. You probably heard of hegemon if you have taken international relations class. Hegemon is like the dominant power. The United States is a hegemon in the world power politics now. Hegemon stability theory is these powerful countries like the police of the world. They have to go around the world, spend their own resources. Others are not going to pay for it. You're doing the police job. Here, New York City, you have police, but we pay for it through taxes, right? But we go and do stability around the world. We create our military bases around the world. We have ability to project power, to create order in the society, world society, and not chaos. Do anybody pay for it? No, they don't directly pay for it as taxes or anything to the United States. But this public good we create, public good, remember what public good is? I mentioned already about non-excludable and non-rivalrous. This public good, world public good we create of security and order, we reap benefits. And this is the hegemonic stability theory that dominant country does it, and single dominant state does it, and it accepts the price it comes with it. Okay. Now let's talk about the rise of neoliberalism. Okay, we talked about FDR, and then by the time end of World War II, he wasn't alive. He died, and Truman became the president. And then we have to drop the the nuclear bomb in Japan to end the war in the Pacific side, Japan. Okay. Now, the economic policies of government intervening and created more equality in the society. American society was trending towards more equal society. Then 1970s onwards, neoliberalism began, and the economic inequality started to increase, and it's increasing up till now. And what happened in 1970s is Richard Nixon become president. Richard Nixon, Nixon, Nixon. So he looked at his famous economist. His name is Frederick Hayek. Hayek last name is spelled as Hayek. He wrote this book called Road to Serfdom. He's talking about like serfdom in Russia, like slavery. He's talking about how if government is intervening in the markets, it will violate individual rights and liberties, and countries and states will become like a serf society. The people will be subjected to the state, because in Soviet Union people are subjected to the state, authoritarian state, not a democratic state. What is the difference? Democratic state is ruled by the consent of the governed. We give the consent to our government to govern us. Not rule is the word. King is the one who use rules. Rule us. Here they govern us, right? Govern the federal government. But in authoritarian state, they don't want your consent. They don't want the consent of the people. Coercion. They use coercion. So road to serfdom, he's talking, if government is intervening in the free market, slowly your individual rights will erode, and it'll end up becoming a serfdom state. Yeah, scary idea, scary thought. Yeah. And Nixon took that idea and ran with it. And after Nixon, 1980, another man came to power, conservative politically, and he took it to another heights of the idea of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is like complete free market, government should have minimum role. In 1980s, Ronald Reagan came to power. He was a two-term president. When he ran for office, he said the most scariest thing to hear is that I am from the government and I'm here to help you. Isn't that funny? And he said that while in campaign stump speeches. You want limited role of the government, federal government. and let the market do. He had supporters from the other side of the Atlantic. Margaret Thatcher, she's the English Prime Minister. She's also read Hayek idea and was totally bought into it. She did not want government intervening in free markets. She talks about her dad owning a small business store, and so how government policies has an impact on in affecting the wealth of individual businessmen and hence the wealth of the state. So everybody should be allowed to do what they want. For Ronald Reagan, his ideology moves, his mentor of ideas, economic ideas, was Milton Friedman. Milton, you know how to spell Milton. Friedman, Fireedman. Milton Friedman is a Nobel laureate. He won the Nobel Prize in economics. He was also a professor. Okay, and he wrote a book called Capitalism and Freedom, and he's another. Free to Choose is a very famous book, still in print. Free to Choose was also made into a TV show, not like a fun show, like a documentary, and Americans watch it. Sorry, my watch. And it shows how Americans were ready to get to the ideas. But the neoliberalism idea is to give tax cuts to the rich. Okay, tax cuts to the rich, so that when the rich has more money in their pocket, because government gave tax cuts, they will use that money to produce more jobs and opportunities, and that will benefit the middle class and the poor, is the argument. And that is called trickle down economics. So the money trickles from the top to the bottom. And many say it doesn't trickle down. That's completely a baloney, to according to some scholars. Like one is David Harvey. He's a scholar who professor at the CUNY. He wrote a book called A Brief History of Neoliberalism. And in Brief History of Neoliberalism, he talked about wherever the neoliberalism idea went, it created inequality. Inequality, so as to graphs, and instability. And so the globalization idea itself is full of neoliberalism ideas. That means telling countries which are newly becoming, coming out of colonization. India got its freedom in 1947, and it was still a government regulated economy. And China, which joined in 1980s, created the free market. I know it's a communistic country, but Deng Xiaoping, right after Mao Zedong died, Mao Zedong was the leader, like an authoritarian leader who stayed in power for long, and because he right after the Japanese defeat in World War II, he took over power, stayed until his death. He was kept the communist economy, but right after his death, Deng Xiaoping came and said, does it matter if it's a black cat or a white cat as long as it catches the mouse? What is he trying to say? He's saying, like, as long as capitalism or communism, as long as it produces economic might, it's good for the country and the government in power, which is the only party in power, a communist party. It unleashed the economic spirit of the Chinese entrepreneurship. And he actually allowed free markets in some areas first to test it, whether it is a successful, like pilot program. Those regions were called special economic zones, SEZ, write it down, special economic zones. And it, boom, this were like, took off economically. And so then they completely made free market ideas for the rest of the China, and it brought 400 million people out of poverty. 400 freaking million people out of poverty. That's more than the population of the United States, from abject poverty into better standards. Of course, it increased consumerism. All those are there. And China is growing at a rate, at least was growing for the last 30 years at a rate 10% on average. No country in humankind has ever grown in that such a fast breakneck speed, but China has. Okay. Now India is the fastest growing economy for 2023. China is the second, because of the COVID crisis happened, and no COVID, zero COVID policies of restriction created an economic decline in China. But it might come back again. It might have at least 6% growth expected. Now, so we understood and followed and talked about different neoliberal policies and laissez-faire economics. Next lecture, I will be talking to you about mercantilism. Okay, and looking forward to discussing that ideas. Good luck.